Hello, my name is Richard Blundell from the Venture Scale Academy, and welcome to the first in a whole series of masterclasses called the Best in SaaS Masterclasses. And just before we kick off, I'll introduce my guest today just to tell you a little bit more about this series. In this masterclass series, you will not be hearing stories about founders who've gone out and sold their business for £3.5 billion and the story of how they did it. If that's why you've joined this masterclass series, we're not the location for that. This is about practical point solutions for practical point problems. This is for SaaS founders who are actually in the arena, who are bootstrapping, who are iterating, who are hiring, pitching, pricing, raising. This is very hands-on as a series. And over the course of this Best in SaaS masterclass series, I will be talking to operators, deep industry experts, investors, anybody who can help members of the Venture Scale Academy or SaaS founders generally with particular problems to particular issues. Now, that might be pricing, that might be packaging, that might be driving inbound leads to your business, that might be mastering LinkedIn. But today we're kicking off the series, and it's my very great pleasure to introduce David Levine from Glen Luna Ventures. He'll do a far better job than I will introducing himself. But today we're talking about raising and how to raise through angels and the difference between raising through angels and through VCs. But before I ask my first couple of questions of David, thank you for being on the Masterclass series. Tell me a bit more about Glen Luna, tell me a bit more about Manchester Angels, and tell me a bit more about David Levine.
Thank you for having me, Richard. As the name suggests, Manchester Angels is a Manchester-based angel investment network. Approximately 50 exit angels in B2B, AI, SaaS, as well as deep tech such as life sciences, bio, and advanced materials. Brilliant bunch of people, brilliant bunch of investors, and brilliant bunch of entrepreneurs who have been on the journey of starting, growing, scaling, and exiting a technology business, who now apply that mindset and that capital to other early stage startups. I also run a business called Glen Luna Ventures, so we spend our days helping founders all over the world raise money from investors, primarily VCs, all over the world. So hopefully I can give really good insight, not to just what an angel looks like, and not just looks for, and not just what a VC looks for, but how those two marry together. Because very often angels come in alongside VCs. Yeah. Very often angels come in before VCs, and only when things go really wrong do angels come in after VCs.
Okay, that's a really interesting point I'd like to pick up on a bit later if that's possible. But if we put ourselves in the minds of Venture Scale Academy members and indeed any early stage founder, many of them will be sitting at home right now. Perhaps they've got a full-time job. Perhaps they're starting to noodle at the weekends and in evenings on an AI solution, an agentic solution of some sort. And they're thinking probably two things. Number one, how do I get customers to buy my incredible creation, my genius? And number two, how do I raise money so that I can scale my business, hire a bigger team, and so on and so forth? So let's assume for now that our early stage founder doesn't know much about the world of investment. Talk to me about angels. Who are they typically? And go in the mind of an angel. What is it that they're looking for in a business and in a founder? We're going to talk about the deck a bit later on and the importance of that. But straight out of the gate, who is an angel? What are they doing? Who are they? And what is it that they are primarily looking for from an early stage business?
Let me tell you about angels, and I also want to tell you about some of the myths around angel investment as well, because I think that's really important. Angels are typically people who have built a business before, have been at the coalface of starting off that business, of making their first hires, sometimes of raising money, sometimes bootstrapping, scaling and building that business until they get the exit. And they now have time on their hands. They're often looking for meaning, right? Something not often discussed is when angels exit a business, what do you do? They have capital to deploy, and they're looking for returns. They're looking for financial returns of their money, just like a VC. But they're also looking for something to do in the nicest possible way. And they have huge amounts of experience. They've literally walked the 1,000 miles in the shoes of the people at the Venture Scale Academy. So that's who angels are. Very often there are a number of myths that surround angel investing. Number one is angels are much easier to convince than VCs. Honestly, that's not always the case. Here in Europe, we have VCs who have rarely actually been in a business, working inside the business, either as a founder or an operator. If you look at the US, something like 16, 17% of all VCs or more have founded a business, and as much as 2/3, over 66% of VCs have been operators at businesses. So they really get and understand what it's like to be the coalface. Whereas in Europe, although that is starting to change, there is a single digit percentage of investors who have been founders or operators. Very often they're lawyers or accountants, they're other financial or professional services providers who have now found themselves in venture capital. And that is an awful lot harder to convince those angels, because the angels have been there, they've seen how hard it really and genuinely is, and they're often more skeptical. The second myth of angel investing is it's much quicker to raise money from angels. Now, yes, it's true, angels perhaps don't have as long a due diligence process or a legal process, but sometimes these guys, they're out on holiday, right, because they've earned it, or actually very often they're doing 16 other different things because they're now back in the build mode. When you're an entrepreneur, one of the things you learn is to focus. And as an entrepreneur, we all have lots of ideas, we want to go and do lots of things, but you need to focus on the business. All of a sudden, you're out of your original business. You no longer have to have focus or need that discipline of focus. So you're doing a load of different things. And also, unlike VCs, angels don't have a calendarized investment committee meeting at a certain date of the month every 2 weeks or whatever it might be. So they can be, not always, they can be a lot slower to make decisions, which are some of the 3 of the urban myths that surround angels and how they invest.
Is there a sense with angels that they've sat in the investee company's chair and they remember how hard it was when they had to raise? They've literally sat in the chair
Yeah.
of the company that's approaching them. And is there a sense of, I don't know, not poacher turned gamekeeper, but a sense of, I'm going to give these guys a hard time because I remember what it was like when I was raising?
It's a great question. There is certainly a very large degree of empathy.
Yeah.
I've been there. I've sat in those shoes, and I've sat in that seat, and I've walked in those shoes. And either it can be a case of I managed it against all odds, and there's nobody with me who gave me the time. I had to do it all myself, and therefore, boom, I'm going to make sure you go through that. If I can do it, you can do it. So very often that comes from a really good place. And sometimes it's a case of I know how hard this is.
Yeah.
You don't yet because you've not been through it. This might be your first time as a founder.
Yeah.
So if the guy or the girl who is not the super empathetic one in the room who's been there and done that cannot give you tough love from a
Yeah.
place of love, then who else can?
Yeah. And do they invest because they're looking to be involved in the business? I know they're angel operators versus those that are just happy to invest their money and get out the way. And the sort of second half of that question is, if they are looking to be involved, do they recognize how challenging that can be to a founder, just as it would have been had their investors played too big a part in their businesses in the past?
Look, just like VCs and any other type of investor, there is a whole range of profile. There are some angels who like to get really involved and roll up their sleeves and work in the business on the day to day. There are some who will dip in and out, some who don't want to hear from you, right, until you call them and tell them you've accepted a deal to sell out the business and everyone is very happy. So there is a whole range of different people. I think sometimes it's one of the interesting dynamics is angels forget, right? They forget what it was like. They forget what it was like to have that investor call you up every week and say, how are you getting on? How's it been? Ask you for emails. And also technology moves on. You take an investor an angel who, I don't know, set their business 10 years ago and exited 3 or 4 years ago and hasn't really done a lot since. The world is very different.
Yeah.
But the idea of you need to go and hire 60 people, you can do the job of 60 people with AI.
Yeah.
Um, and the world's very different. So it would be nice if angels had a really accurate view of what the world is like from the position of an entrepreneur, and they do, but they forget sometimes.
Yeah. And final question on the angels and the personalities themselves. Uh, have you ever seen examples? Founders might be thinking, I'm going to go and get some angels that are really well connected in my space. Perhaps they've come from my industry and so on and so forth. A myth that I've always held to be true is that angels bring introductions as well as cash. I don't think I've ever seen that work incredibly well, but I'm really prepared to have my myth busted. Should founders be looking for angels who they perceive to have great connections, great sales leads, or so on in the industry they're in? Or is that a really secondary reason? Have you ever seen it work?
I have seen it work well, but not often. Um,
Okay.
I think the reality is, look, if you're an exit angel, you have likely been out of the game for a period of time,
Mm.
whether because you've been acquired and you've had an earn-out period, whether that period has completed and you had like a gardening leave type period. So you're not necessarily in the game. So I don't think you choose one angel over another because of their sales leads that they could potentially bring. I think the reason why you choose angels is because you get on well with them, you have great chemistry with them, you can see them adding value. Where they add value is in deep superpower level insights into your market. Maybe you have not been the person in the control room when the go no go decision has been made, but
Mm.
the angel has been, and that's immensely valuable, how the market dynamics shape up. But also there are really strong value adds from angels who have built businesses but have not necessarily been in your very specific industry, right? Because there are challenges, whether it comes to people, whether it comes to interpreting signals from a potential customer, whether it's somebody who is raised from investors who you then like to target, or whatever it might be. There is a series of things that an angel can bring to the table because of their generic experience in running a business not dissimilar to yours. And
Mm.
there are things that are superpowers in your very specific industry because they've spent 20 years deeply involved in that industry.
Yeah, brilliant. Now let's move to the deck and the proposition. You're going to an angel for the first time. We advise in the Venture Scale Academy that the deck is there as designed to get a meeting, not to get an investment. Would you agree with that, first of all?
I'd slightly change how you structure that. So the way I like to think of it is whether it's an angel or a VC, you have a teaser deck. The
Yep.
purpose of a teaser deck is to get that meeting.
Yes.
How you get that meeting is through introductions or through emails. So with an email, the subject sells the open sells the copy sells the deck, and the deck sells the meeting.
Yeah.
Once, and that's its own job. So if that's all it ever does and never sees the light of day again, great, job done. That's what success looks like. But you then do need a more in-depth deck. Some slides you'll talk through, sometimes you won't. So, you'll talk through, for example, deep financial projections. You'll talk about the workings, how you think of the market, how you think about the market opening up and changing, and the dynamics, and how kind of macroeconomics and politics plays a role in seeing, because you'll talk about your ICP, your ideal customer persona, who the buyer is, where they live, what the problem is that you're solving for them. That's a more in-depth deck that you'll discuss with them. Now, that's the ideal. In reality, somebody might well go, can you send me a more, yeah, that's really interesting. Can you send me more of a deck? You'll want to go, but I'd rather present it to you. And
Yes.
sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah. Okay. So when we're now talking about the deck itself, I mean, it sounds like there's probably two decks here. There's a teaser deck and a more in-depth deck. The first point that I'd make, and I'd love to get your thoughts on it, is this is a process, the deck creation, the deck editing, the deck structure is something that it's a really good idea if you can to get help with from somebody who's either been an investor or has raised money themselves, because you can spend an inordinate amount of time creating your deck and creating a document that actually doesn't do the required job that you would like, which is getting that meeting or a request for further information. Would you agree with that? Would you agree that having some kind of guide, mentor, getting some help is a really good idea for an early stage founder?
Yes, it is. But the way that I talk to my founders is that building a deck is a process.
Mm.
It's an iterative process. It's not just do me a deck and one and done, and then you don't need to speak to that person ever again. The reality is, you, just like your startup itself, you have a number of assumptions as to how and where and in what way certain messages land with investors. And those assumptions need to be validated and tested in the market by sending out and showing and talking it through with investors. And very often, the first set of responses you get will challenge those assumptions. You may need to iterate them. And then the complication then becomes as well, is the response that I'm getting from those investors, is that because those investors have a very specific view of the world, and that's the world through their lens? Or is it highly generic feedback that I'm getting that might highlight an issue with the way that I'm thinking or even communicating about the business? So how do I iterate that? The other challenge is there are as many different ideal pitch deck structures out there as there are pubs in Ireland, right?
Yeah,
There's just loads, and
yeah,
it's very overwhelming.
yeah,
And as soon as you send it to somebody, they'll go, "Oh yeah, but this is how you do it this way, do it this way." The reality is, success is a meeting with an investor.
yeah,
Success is investment from an investor. Your deck is merely a tool to get you there. And there
yeah,
are a lot of different ways of doing it. But I think it's very important that when you have, and you should get a mentor, someone to work with you, not just in the aesthetics, but how you tell the story, someone who can also point out from that kind of objective third party position that I know what you think you're saying, it's just not landing, it's just not quite working in the way you think. And maybe because I have this ability to, because I'm not so close to it, right? My face isn't right up to the wall that my nose can't see around. I think you could say it in a different way and then help to interpret that feedback. It's effectively a coaching role, I would say.
yeah. When you tell a story, which is what an investment deck essentially is, but when you write a novel, you wouldn't believe how long the top selling authors spend making sure they get the cover right, the
Yeah.
right colors, the right images, making sure they get the blurb on the back. And if you're anybody like me thinking about buying a novel at an airport, I always open the book and read the first two paragraphs of the book. And if I'm captured by that book, I will then go and buy it. The reason I'm telling that analogy is that for me, that is very much the importance of the start of the deck and the opening of the deck, and how you don't need to waste time with a pretty cover and a pretty image and a picture of the trees and the difference. For me, the opening of that deck is for you to explain in a way in which a 14-year-old can understand the problem that you have uniquely spotted, hopefully uniquely spotted, in the marketplace. And one of the big pitfalls of decks that I look at, and I've looked at hundreds like you have, is that I spend too long on too many decks trying to figure out what it is they do and who it is they do it for and what it is that is broken that they can fix. So I guess that's a kind of long-winded question, is to say, how important or why is it mission critical for founders to open their deck with visceral customer pain or explaining that pain in a clear way?
So the reality is, and this is where I may disagree with you, is that looks matter. We're all taught as kids not to judge a book by its cover. That's because it's a very natural and human thing to do, and judge a book by its cover. And most investors are at least somewhat human, and it
Mm.
is very important that aesthetics look good. It's nowhere near as important as the stories, and we'll come to that in a second. But I would push back on that point that looks don't matter, because they really do. And to be honest, these days there is no excuse for having a really poor deck. In fact,
Yeah.
you see a really poor deck and you immediately reject it because it's just so easy with Canva or AI tools such as Gamma to like drop text, drop a document, drop an ugly deck into
Mm.
one of these tools and create at least something that's passably pretty. It's so easy that if you don't do that, it's too easy to reject. So it looks very much do matter.
Yeah.
In terms of the messaging, you're absolutely right. It's not just about you being at the airport and reading the first two paragraphs, is that investors are really busy. The deal flow inbox is insane. And you have, in reality, probably less time as an investor to make an initial call than a recruiter does have on a CV. You literally make it, it's confirmation bias 101. You're literally making a decision within 2 minutes. And on your very first slide, I don't want to see too many pretty pictures. I don't want to see the word mission. I don't want to see vision. I don't want to see any of these nonsense terms. What you want to say is, we are a thing that does a thing in order that, or so that, we deliver some benefit or solve some pain for a customer. Explain it as simple as if you were explaining it to your granny, right? It's got to be simple. Now, there's this old term, it's easy to create, it takes me 10 minutes to create a 100-page slide deck, and it takes me 100 hours to reduce 100 to 10, because being succinct and obsessing over words and less is more is really hard, but absolutely critical. On the very first slide, I want to know what it is, because investors are classifiers.
Yeah.
We have huge overflowing inboxes of deals, and we are constantly classifying. Is it an AI deal? Is it a SaaS deal? Is it venture scale? How big's the market? Who's the ICP? How are they doing? What is this thing? If you're like 3 or 4 slides in and the investor still does not know what on earth this is, you're in trouble.
You're out. Yeah.
You're out.
It's going in the bin, isn't it? So clarity is massively important. It's a huge mistake, is it not, to assume that the investor knows your market or understands your pain. The decks that jump out at me are ones where I instantly go, from experience, I recognize that pain. I know that's a problem. I know getting products to market is too slow. I know that my team always use too many Excel spreadsheets. I'm coming up with some very simple examples here, but trying to explaining the thing that you do in a way that the investor is going to go, oh yeah, actually, yeah, that is really painful.
100%.
Yeah.
I mean, it's investors are not just investors in their sector, but they're investors in general. They're people in general. They're knowledge workers in general. And if you are articulating what you are solving, why it's a painkiller and not just a vitamin pill, in a super succinct way that the investor goes, I get that, then you have done most of the job for yourself already.
Absolutely. And then the second thing is to create a visual of a solution, of the solution that you've built that you would like their money to invest in. And again, it's clarity. And if this thing needs to integrate with something, or it needs to engage with an internal audience or an external audience or some kind of process flow, you want a really clear solution that an investor can look at and understand what it is that you've built and where it sits in an ecosystem, so that you actually have the painkiller to the pain.
Absolutely. And you have to do the investor's job for them, right? Don't leave gaps for them to for their mind to fill it in, because once you say a thing, you no longer have control over how somebody else understands that or what they do with that. So you might say a thing and you're meaning something in a certain way because that's how you think about it, and your context is a certain way. But an investor might not necessarily, even if they're super aligned to your thesis. So you're building a legal AI platform, and the angel you're dealing with has just exited a legal AI business, or even just a legal business, and they should utterly get it. Context is king. And they don't necessarily have the same context as you. So you've got to be really clear about that.
Yeah. So you've established your pain, you've vocalized it in a way. You should test it on your granny or your 14-year-old, whoever is closer to you. Make sure they understand that. You have visualized your solution as being the perfect fit to the perfect pain. The next two things that I'm thinking about when I'm investing, or I'm thinking about when I'm helping somebody with their deck, are, what does your perfect customer look like? What is the phrase ICP, ideal customer profile, has been around for 30 years. We love talking about what does a perfect customer look like. And the second question I'm asking is, how many of them are there? And the third question I'm asking is, how many can you address? How many can you present your solution to, sell to in short order? We'll talk about the financial model in a minute, but that's what I'm thinking about is, have you got a clear vision of your perfect customer? Do you know how many of them are there? How big is the market? And therefore, what percentage of those perfect customers do you need to sell to hit the financial goals that you've set yourself? Could you
Look,
expand on that a little bit? Am I going in
yeah,
the right direction?
yeah. Fundamentally, an investor, whether an angel or VC, is thinking about one thing: how are you going to turn my X into 10 times X? If I'm giving you 100 grand, how are you turn that into 1 million for me?
Yeah.
And the way you're doing it is, number one, articulating the pain, and it's got to be a real painkiller and not merely a vitamin pill. I validate and evidence that by, if you give somebody a thing and then you take it away, are they going to cry? Are they going to complain? Are going to be much worse off than without it? That's the painkiller.
Yeah.
And then it's got to be about, how do you define the market from the ground up? And this is where you were starting to get into, right? So many slides do we see that are quite nonsensical in structure, which is a top-down market structure, market sizing exercise. This analyst has said the cybersecurity markets were 28 trillion. I only need like 0.5% to get. That's just nonsensical. Nobody knows what that means, and it just totally undermines your credibility in front of that investor. It's about going bottom up. Who is my ICP? Who is my buyer? Not always the same person, by the way, especially in B2B. But for the thought exercise, let's just carry on. So, who is my buyer? Where do they live? What do they do? Where do they work? What are the platforms? What's the best way of getting to them? That's the kind of go-to-market bit. So, how many of them are there in the world?
Yeah.
And when I say the world, I literally mean Tel Aviv, New Zealand, Papua New Guinea, wherever they are in the world. How many of them are there? And then some type of sensible kind of segmenting strategy. So here are the number of my ICPs who speak English, or in a certain subsegment or in a certain vertical, that I can sensibly and credibly get to address. The term addressable comes in there. And then what percentage share of the addressable segment of my ICP can I really get? Which is almost always, and I really mean almost always, single digit.
Mm. And that is the tangle that founders get in with TAM, SAM, and SOM. Ridiculous TAMs. My opinion, and I love you to push back on me, is I would spend 10 times as long looking at my obtainable market, my immediately obtainable market. My go-to-market plans are that I am going to address companies in the UK, let's say if you're a UK founder, but you may even go further down the pipe than that, right? Because you might say, actually, I'm going to start in the Southeast because I'm based in London. And actually, it's really positive if I can get to see my customer, and that therefore the perfect customer is within a 50-mile radius of where I'm based. So actually, my immediately obtainable market is this. There are X hundreds or X thousands of companies in here that have this geographic location, this demographic. We know the number of employees they've got there. They might be in a particular vertical. They may have some psychographic behaviors or behavioral behaviors that make them perfect for you.
Yeah.
But I would spend 10 times as long. And I think investors want to see that you thought deeply about the first 100 customers, the first 200 customers, 10 times, 100 times more than you've thought about the total addressable market of $8 trillion, which most people know is an absolute pipe dream.
100%. So look, TAM, SAM, SOM is the right approach, right? Total addressable market, so the service addressable market, and then the service obtainable market. But again, it's got to be bottom up. Here is my ICP. Here's how many there are in the world. Here's how much I'll charge. Multiply those three. That's your TAM. Crazy big number, but it just shows that there is a big market for this. My addressable market, my serviceable addressable market, is here is a sensible segmentation strategy. They're English speaking, or they're in advanced manufacturing, or they're in 3D printing, or they're in whatever they're in. And here's how I get to them, and how much I can charge them. And that's my addressable market. And then a typical single digit share. But you're right. I want to see, as an investor, somebody who tells me, number one, they know who their buyer is.
Yeah.
Very often they haven't the faintest idea who their buyer is, or
Yeah.
have only the very lightest of assumptions about who their buyer actually is. But when they know who their buyer is and how they're going to get to them, and literally the how. Are you going to go on LinkedIn and reach out to them? Are you going to go to conferences? If so, What are the conferences? What are the names? When are they? How will you actually do it on the conference floor? I want to see the boring, grunt level, really low level action plan for getting those 100 customers.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And then scaling up that go to market motion if that is the one that works.
And this is something you and I have talked about a great deal over the last few months. And I know it's a personal bugbear of yours. And I would agree with you that a real weakness in too many investor decks is this go to market slide, this go to market zone. I know who my customer is. I know who the economic buyer is. I know their pain. I know their solution. I've tested my solution on this market. In the go to market handbook for B2B SaaS leaders, we dedicate a whole workbook to testing before you go to market to make sure that your economic buyers have that pain. But we're on the deck at the moment. So I've tested my thesis. I know who my buyer is. I know their pain. I know their market size. I know my addressable market that I'm going to go after. And this is the bit that frustrates you and frustrates me. Am I going to be marketing led? Is it the marketing team job to go and bring leads and drive inbound leads to my organization? Or am I going to be sales led and I'm going to go outbound and I'm going to be doing email campaigns and cadences? Or is it a combination of the both? Or actually, have I actually considered that there might be a channel partner out there that already has a sales and marketing team, which means I don't need to spend your hard-earned cash on a sales and marketing team, and I'm going to go to market via the channel partners. But whatever it is, for goodness sake, you must explain to investors how you're going to eat this elephant. Is it with a knife and fork, or is it with a flesh-eating virus? That's what you must explain.
It is a truth universally acknowledged that investors will often like to back second time or serial founders because a first time founder spends 90% of the time talking about problem and solution and 10% of the time go to market. A serial entrepreneur spends probably 95% of the time talking about go to market because it's about who is my customer? How do I get to them?
Yeah.
That is absolutely critical.
Yeah. And that will bring in things like product messaging. And we haven't got time on this podcast to go through that. I think that's a whole set of skills separate to that. Before we start moving towards the end, allied to your deck, you need a financial model. And for goodness sake, make sure that the numbers in your deck match up to whatever you're handing in as your financial model. What leads me to the financial model? And I'd love you to talk to me about how people build them and where they go. How keen are you to see pricing, thought through pricing in an investor deck?
So I think from an angel investment perspective, it's actually less important because by definition, the angels are talking to really early stage startups. Those early stage startups have assumptions
Yeah.
about pricing. And the reality is pricing is one of those things you absolutely have to test because the market may show you're absolutely out of kilter or you may be charging far too little for what you're saying. And very often, particularly first time fans will look at kind of cost plus type pricing, which it costs me my unit economics, it costs me X to deliver this, therefore I'll double X, as opposed to looking at the value, which is how much value am I delivering to my ICP? And it's quite a brave thing. I do get it. It's quite a brave thing to take a value-based approach, but it's absolutely the right approach. So I think the reality is really early stage. Most investors are really aware this is going to change.
Yeah.
We're going to start out with some assumptions. We're going to charge what we can charge and as much as we can get away with before somebody blinks and somebody says, I can't do that, and other mechanisms. So, of course, pricing is important, going back to the market sizing and going back to the how are you going to turn my 100K into $1 million for me? And that's based on how big you can create this business, which is based on how big the market is and how you think about getting to your ICPs. So pricing obviously a key part of that. But I think that's where investors are a lot more relaxed. I think they'll get to the point and say, so I get to the point and say, the market will find its natural equilibrium on this kind of market motion on pricing. So the market is big enough. If this is the right team and this is really a painkiller, we'll get there on pricing.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think if we're going to focus on early stage investment, seed investment, it's a very different story when we get to Series A. We'll do another masterclass on Series A and VCs. I really want to tap into your wisdom and your knowledge around the angel world. At the seed stage, they're not expecting you to rock up with 50 customers, all happy, average order values. What they're looking for here is they're looking for, is this, as you say, a painkiller? Does this team or this founder have the vision, have the ambition, done the research? Is the market big enough? That's what they're looking for, isn't it? That early stage green shoots, not a fully made bed at this stage.
Yeah, and they're looking for coachability.
Yeah,
Will this founder or founding team take my advice? And they don't want
yeah,
too much coachability, because you don't want a founder who says yes to everything you say. You want someone who's thoughtful and
yeah,
mindful and
yeah,
knows their market and has opinions about what will work and will not work, and has a kind of test, observe, and iterate mentality. That's what you're looking for. I think we
yeah.
also talk an awful lot about, yeah, I'm going to, as an angel, I'm going to back the jockey, not the horse. Are
Yes,
the right people? I'd love that to be as true as people say it is. In reality, yes, we do want to back the jockey and not the horse, but we'd ideally like that horse to already start to run and in the right direction. And it looks like they might already have what it takes to get in front of the other horses, and then we'll back the jockey. But that's just an
yes.
observation.
Great to have both, isn't it? I mean, there are plenty of angels that will just back a founder. They just believe in the founder and they
Yeah.
believe in the personality of the founder. And a lot of that comes to their knowledge of the sector, their knowledge of the space. I always think there's two kinds of founders, and one I love and one always worries me. Founder A is a founder who has worked within an organization, who has spotted a problem within that
Yeah.
organization, who has gone home and noodled and come up with a solution for that, perhaps using AI or whatever tech they want, has then taken that back to the company. The company's gone, wow, that's fantastic. That's really solved our problems. And very quick, smart is now beginning to think about, how do I build a company and take that solution out to other companies, just like the one I've worked at. Founder B are people who've gone, I've got a great idea for a product, have gone out and built a product, and are now looking for a solution to go and solve without having that insider knowledge. And I think founder A is much more backable than founder B. However, if you are founder B, you must spend 10 times the amount of time on research and really understanding what the pain is in the industry that you've discovered. Would you agree with that?
100%. It's a difference between a lived experience and a non-lived experience, right?
Yeah,
You've been through that pain. You
yeah,
experienced it every day. You understand intimately why that pain got in the way of you doing work, and now you're articulating that to an investor. Versus the other founder who has had an idea, probably doesn't have much in the way of validation yet, that actually that is genuinely a pain out there in the real world that needs solving.
yeah,
And there's, when it's especially early stage where angels come to it, when it is about jockey, not horse, you want to back the jockey who has been through many years of training in jockey school, or ever jockeys get trained, versus the guy who's just been to the bookies loads of times and reads the newspaper, the betting tip bit in the newspaper, and puts lots of bets on, and then decides one day they want to be a jockey. You
yeah,
want someone who's been there, done that, and
yeah.
has experienced that pain for themselves.
We've got the next masterclass is going to be on the financial model, which is maybe a less exciting subject for some founders. So I won't take your time up with that, but we'll be looking at critical SaaS metrics and why they're so important and why they need to be monitored from the get-go. But if you're an early stage founder, you do need to produce a financial model. Is that a question of reaching out to an accountant, a CFO, someone who knows spreadsheets? Should you become an expert on spreadsheets? What would
Yeah.
your guidance be on that?
I'm a really big believer that early stage you've got to do this yourself,
Okay.
because so a financial model in reality is a cash flow model. It's
Yeah.
not hard. We just perceive it as hard. And that means in any particular month, I start off with a certain amount of money. I get money from customers or grants or investments in that month. I spend money on staff, on AI tools and other SaaS tools, on insurance, on locking up my bike every day, on 16 coffees a day. And at the end of the month, here's how much money I end up with. And then it kind of tells you your runway, right? And
Yeah.
here is when I'm going to run out of runway. And therefore, that's what I'm focused on. And I think the reason why it's really important is because that accountant, that CFO, that mate who's built this model for you will not be in the room with you when an investor is kicking the tires. You're
Yeah.
going to be in that room. You need to know how to respond. And it should be fairly straightforward at the angel stage to understand that. And I think it's a bit of a red flag when, oh yeah, I got this free help from this accountant and it's got a 28-page complex business model, which I've broken and I don't know how to fix. There are people fixing that problem, but you've got to know the numbers yourself.
You've got to know what the targets are. You've got to know what your burn rate is.
You don't know what a number means.
Yeah.
What does that mean? If I want a deal this month and I've stuck $6,000 in my cash flow for that, so okay, but you've won a deal, great, well done. But it's going to take you 3 months to onboard that customer, isn't it?
Yes.
Like all the integrations and security clearance and everything else, and therefore the cash that is actually going to hit your bank isn't going to happen until month 4.
Yes.
But that's the real number.
Yes.
That I want to see. It's that nuance that's critical.
Yeah. And as I say, the next video, we'll be looking at customer acquisition costs, customer lifetime value. We've got Simon Smith, who's another expert in the Venture Scale Academy, who'll be doing that. Final question. We talked a lot about the deck because that is a critical part of angel investing. But could you sum up for me, for any early stage entrepreneur listening to this masterclass, perhaps as a podcast or in the car, wherever they might be, what are the most important? There were 3 things that are most important to keep front of mind when you want to raise successfully from angels. And we're going to talk about VCs before we go. What would those top three things be?
Number 1, bear in mind the one question in any investor's mind, whether they are a VC or an angel, which is, how are you going to turn my money into 10x? That's a fundamental question. An angel is still not a philanthropist.
Yeah.
VC isn't.
And do I believe you can do it, right? Do I believe you can?
So number 1 is, how are you going to do that?
How are you
Number
going to do it?
2, why are you the people to do this? Why are you the team? What secret knowledge do you have about the industry, about getting to your ICP, to your buyers, that makes it? And number 3, is this really a painkiller, a must-have, or is it merely a vitamin pill, a nice to have? They're the 3 most important things I would say you need to present, whether it's an angel or a VC.
Brilliant. David, we've kept you way longer than we expected, but time has absolutely flown. I suspect we're going to need to do another one of these. In terms of getting in contact with you, you've graciously agreed to be an expert within the Venture Scale Academy, so they can reach out through the Academy and get to you if people want advice and guidance. I know you do that. How's best to get hold of you? I know you work with VCs as well. I don't want to discount that. You very graciously talked about angels today in this, so you can give us an insight to that. But how's the best way to reach out? LinkedIn, Glenn Luna?
Yeah, LinkedIn is just by far the best. It's just where, because I only can work with a small number of people at a time. And so LinkedIn is where I try and amplify the impact and the help that I can give to a lot of people. So with pleasure, add me on LinkedIn. And then if anything I do to help, just send me a message there or send me an email. My email's there and we can get going.
Fantastic. So if you'd like to know more about this series, about the Venture Scale Academy, just put Venture Scale Academy in Google or reach out to me, Richard Blundell, on LinkedIn, or Paul Watson or Chris Topman, any one of us, and we will direct you in. We've created this series, we've created the Academy to get experts in to help early stage founders on point solutions for real world problems. And David Levine has just shown you what an expert can do to help you, to guide you. Do reach out for help if you need us. We are here to help and we're here to support. David, thank you ever so much, not on just behalf of the Academy, but also all entrepreneurs who have learned a huge amount from your wisdom today.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks for having me.
No worries at all. Take care.